As my father took his final breaths, his skin pale against the hospital sheets, my stepmother leaned across him and looked me in the eye. Her voice was steady, almost satisfied. "You were his biggest disappointment." The words hit harder than any slap. I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just sat there, frozen, while her eyes burned through me with the same contempt she'd carried for years. She turned back to his lifeless body like I didn't matter, like I was nothing more than the reason she had to be there in the first place. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that just hours before my father died, he had called me into that room alone. He told me something she never expected, and I kept quiet, waiting for the lawyer. When he finally walked in with the envelope in his hand, the air changed. What he read out loud turned the entire room against her, and the woman who had spent years tearing me down suddenly started screaming, because the truth my father left behind didn't just speak for me, it shattered every lie she had ever told. Everyone watched in silence. When I got the call from the hospital, I was sitting at my kitchen table, eating cold leftover pasta and clicking through freelance job boards like I always did on quiet Monday nights. The nurse's voice was gentle, but clinical. My father had taken a turn for the worse. They didn't think he'd make it through the night. I didn't cry right away. I just stared at the wall, my fork still in my hand, heart hammering in my chest. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles in your bones when grief tries to sneak in early, like your body knows something terrible is coming before your mind can process it. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my car keys, and drove across town. The roads were wet from a passing storm. Every red light felt like a personal punishment for all the moments I hadn't spent with him lately. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 weeks. He'd said he was fine, just tired. Loretta said there was nothing to worry about. But Loretta had been lying since the day she married him. When I walked into the ICU, the air smelled like bleach and machines. It was quiet except for the hum of monitors and the occasional muffled cough from down the hall. I spotted him instantly. My father, Thomas Bell, once a proud architect who designed some of the most stunning homes in the city, now looked like a shadow of himself. His skin had lost its glow, his cheeks hollowed, his chest rising and falling in uneven intervals. He looked small, and that scared me. I stood beside his bed and reached for his hand. It felt cold, but he moved his thumb slightly when I touched it. I whispered his name, and for a second, I swore he smiled. I hadn't always felt this distant from him. In fact, I used to be a daddy's girl. He raised me alone for almost 7 years after my mother died. We cooked pancakes on Sundays, took long walks with our beagle, and built pillow forts in the living room on rainy days. He taught me how to tie my shoes, how to fix a bike chain, and how to dream big, even when life felt small. Everything changed when Loretta came into our lives. I was 14, awkward, and guarded. She was polished, loud, and exhausting in the way some people are when they need to be the center of every room. She wasn't cruel right away, just distant, always correcting my posture, commenting on my clothes, or calling my art cute but pointless. I tried to bond with her. I really did. I asked if I could help her cook, if she wanted to come to my school's open house, if she needed help decorating the new guest room. But every time I tried, she made it clear I wasn't wanted. Not really. And the worst part was that slowly, my father stopped noticing. He stopped asking me to hang out after school. He missed my art showcase 2 years in a row. He laughed nervously when Loretta teased me at dinner. He told me I was being too sensitive when I told him I felt pushed out. By the time I turned 20, I'd moved out and barely visited. Not because I didn't love him, but because being in that house made me feel like an outsider in my own story. Still, I never stopped checking in. I called, even when Loretta answered and made it clear I was interrupting. I sent birthday cards. I texted when I knew he was at his office alone. And when I heard he'd been hospitalized 2 months earlier, I made every effort to visit, until Loretta told me he wasn't up for company, that he needed rest, that I should give him space. Now, seeing him in that hospital bed, my chest ached with everything unsaid. I pulled the chair closer and sat with him in silence, tracing circles on the back of his hand with my thumb like I used to do when I was little. His breathing stuttered once, then smoothed out. And that's when I heard her heels in the hallway. Click, 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 Loretta. She walked into the room like she owned the place, lips painted deep red, her perfume too strong for a hospital ward. She looked at me like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out of her life. I didn't speak. Neither did she. She just looked at my father, then back at me, and smiled. But it wasn't a smile of comfort. It was the kind that warned a storm was coming. And I knew, deep in my gut, that whatever peace I'd found in those few quiet minutes with my father was about to be shattered. Loretta didn't say anything at first. She placed her designer handbag on the side table like she was settling in for a casual lunch and not a man's final hours. She stood beside my father's bed and adjusted the blanket like she was playing the role of the loving wife. And then she turned to me, her eyes cold and smug. "I see you finally decided to show up." I didn't answer. I just looked at my dad, watching the steady beep of the monitor, silently willing it to keep going. She sighed loudly like my presence inconvenienced her. "He's been asking for you, you know, but not in the way you're thinking." I kept my mouth shut. Over the years, I'd learned that arguing with Loretta was like throwing a match into gasoline. She didn't want resolution. She wanted a fight. She wanted proof that she could break me. "He told me he regretted a lot of things," she continued, brushing imaginary lint off her blouse. "Mainly how much energy he wasted trying to fix someone who didn't want to be fixed." I blinked. My jaw clenched, but I still didn't speak. She took a step closer, standing now between me and the heart monitor. "He tried so hard with you, Kaya, but you were always lost, moody, ungrateful. You had everything and still acted like a victim." I inhaled deeply and focused on my father's hand. His fingers didn't twitch this time. I wasn't sure if he was even aware anymore. That thought hit harder than her words. Then came the final blow. You were his biggest disappointment. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said it. So calm, so certain, like she'd rehearsed that line and waited for just the right moment to use it. I looked up at her then. Really looked. There was no sadness in her face, no grief, just bitterness and something that looked dangerously close to satisfaction. I didn't speak. I wanted to. I wanted to scream, to curse, to say everything I'd buried over the years, but something in me refused to give her that. Instead, I just looked back down at my father's face, willing him to open his eyes and make it all stop. Loretta laughed under her breath. "Of course you won't defend yourself. You never do, always playing the silent martyr." She moved to sit in the corner chair and crossed her legs, like this was just another afternoon of judging me from a distance. My cousin Jade arrived not long after. She stepped into the room quietly, glanced at Loretta and then at me. Her face tensed when she saw the look in my eyes, and she squeezed my shoulder as she passed. She knew the history. She'd seen it all unfold over the years. She didn't have to ask what had been said. We sat there together, the three of us, in heavy silence. The only sounds were the monitor and the occasional distant cough from a nurse's station. I kept holding my father's hand, gently brushing my thumb over his knuckles. And then, for a moment, he stirred. His eyelids fluttered. His head turned slightly in my direction. A faint whisper escaped his lips. "Kaya." I leaned in. "I'm here, Dad. I'm right here." He smiled. It was faint, but it was real. And I saw something in that smile. Regret, love, maybe both. Loretta stood up quickly, trying to lean in too, but he didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on mine. He tried to say more, but no words came out. Just a shallow exhale, and then nothing. The monitor flatlined. The nurse came rushing in, pressed a few buttons, and then quietly shook her head. Time of death, 9:16 p.m. Loretta stepped back, hands clasped together as if she were the grieving widow. But her face was unreadable. No tears, no tremble. Just a tight-lipped expression and a glance in my direction like she'd already claimed victory. I felt like I was underwater, the room muffled and blurry. But deep in my pocket, I felt the weight of the envelope my father had given me just a few days earlier. His voice echoed in my mind. "Whatever happens, just wait for the lawyer." So I stood. I kissed his forehead. I said goodbye. And I left Loretta alone in that sterile room with all her lies and cold, practiced smiles, because I knew her moment was coming, and it was going to burn. The night after my father died, I barely slept. I lay on my couch in a hoodie that still smelled faintly like the hospital, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in slow, useless circles. I thought I'd cry. I thought I'd break down or scream or throw something, but I didn't. I just lay there, replaying his final whisper, the look in his eyes, and the way Loretta had already started making calls before his body was even cold. She didn't waste a second. By morning, she had already posted a heartfelt tribute on Facebook, full of photos that didn't include me. The caption read, "The love of my life. Thank you for our beautiful journey. I'll miss you forever." Underneath, people were commenting things like, "So sorry for your loss, Loretta," and "You two were soulmates." One even wrote, "I hope Kaya is supporting you through this." I turned off my phone and tossed it across the room. That same morning, I found the envelope my father had handed me. I had tucked it between 2 notebooks in my dresser drawer when I got home. At the time, I didn't know what was inside. I hadn't opened it. I just remembered his voice. "Whatever happens, wait for the lawyer. Let him speak for me." That was all I needed to hear to trust him. For the first time in years, he had looked at me without distraction or guilt, and I knew he meant it. So I waited. 3 days later, I stood outside the law office of Hayes and Milton, LLP, clutching the unopened envelope in a knot of nerves that hadn't loosened since the funeral. Jade walked beside me. She offered to come for moral support, and I didn't turn her down. Her presence was like armor, silent, solid, and grounding. Loretta was already inside when we arrived. She wore a tailored black blazer, pearls, and that same smugness she always carried like perfume. She smiled politely at Mr. Hayes when he entered, acting like the grieving widow she had curated so carefully for the public. "Let's begin," he said, nodding for us to take our seats. We sat at a long mahogany table in a quiet conference room. The lights were warm, the air too still. Mr. Hayes opened a thick file and cleared his throat. "As per the last amended will of Thomas Elliott Bell, I will now read the final distribution of assets and personal wishes." Loretta leaned back, crossing her legs. I could see her calculating already, mentally adding up property values, investment accounts, retirement funds. She had spent years treating his name like her ticket to a better life, and she was about to find out just how much or how little of that ticket was still valid. "First," Mr. Hayes began, "a personal letter was left with instructions to read it aloud before the official estate items are addressed." He unfolded the paper. The room went quiet. "To Loretta," he read, "I know this moment is uncomfortable. I'm not proud of everything that happened between us, but I need you to hear this from me directly." Loretta shifted in her seat. "You and I built a life together, but there were pieces of me you never accepted, especially Kaya. My daughter was never your burden, no matter how you treated her like one." I froze. My hands gripped the armrest. I failed her in many ways. I let silence replace courage. But in these final moments, I want her to know I saw it all. Every insult, every cold shoulder, every attempt to erase her from my world. I allowed it, and for that, I'm sorry. This will is my attempt to make things right. Loretta sat bolt upright, her jaw clenched. Mr. Hayes continued, now reading the formal parts. "I leave the entirety of my architectural business holdings, my personal residence, and my savings account to my daughter, Kaya Bell." Loretta gasped audibly. "What?" "To Loretta Bell, I leave only the cabin in Fairwater County, as it was a property she personally decorated and requested years ago." Her face went white. That cabin was worth maybe $40,000 on a good day. She stood furious. "This is a joke. He wouldn't do this. I took care of him for years. I ran that house. I was his wife." Mr. Hayes stayed calm. "He made these decisions clearly and consciously. We updated the will together 3 weeks ago. It's notarized and witnessed." Loretta's hands trembled. Her voice cracked. She manipulated him. She turned him against me. I didn't say a word. I just reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. Inside it was a simple handwritten note. "I trust you to carry on with what matters." Let her scream. The truth belongs to you now. And that's when Loretta started yelling. Screaming, actually. Throwing accusations and insults as everyone in the room stared in stunned silence. But I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even feel angry. I felt free. Loretta's voice echoed off the walls of that pristine law office like a siren. Mr. Hayes calmly tried to speak over her, but she didn't care. She was unraveling in real time, wild-eyed, red-faced, hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the conference table like it might steady her world. "This is theft!" she screamed, pointing directly at me. "She manipulated him. She poisoned him against me. I was there every day while she stayed away. She doesn't deserve any of it." I didn't flinch. I just looked at her. Really looked. The woman who had spent years mocking my interests, undermining my relationship with my father, and treating me like I was some tragic leftover from his past. She was finally out of places to hide. Mr. Hayes sat calmly, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Mrs. Bell, everything you're alleging was anticipated. Thomas was very clear in our final meetings. He understood how this would affect you. But these were his decisions. They are legal, binding, and final." Loretta's face twisted into something I'd never seen before, something raw, panicked, almost childlike in its desperation. "He wouldn't do this to me. He loved me." "He did," I said quietly. "But he also finally saw you. All of you." She spun toward me, eyes wide. "You think you won? You think this makes you better than me?" I stood slowly, not out of pride, but because my legs were done sitting in silence. My hands were steady. My voice didn't shake. "I don't need to be better than you. I just needed him to remember who I was, and he did." For a moment it was quiet, and in that silence, something settled. Not vengeance, not even satisfaction, just truth. She turned to Mr. Hayes again, her voice cracking now. I need time to contest this, to get a lawyer. There must be something I can do." Mr. Hayes nodded politely. "You're welcome to pursue legal avenues, but I assure you we've prepared for every angle. Witnesses were present. He even recorded a video confirmation, if you'd like me to play it." Loretta's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her hands dropped from the table, limp at her sides. For the first time, she looked small. Not in the way my father had looked in that hospital bed, but in the way someone looks when the mask finally breaks and they have to face themselves in the mirror. I glanced at Jade. She gave me a subtle nod, quiet support pulsing between us like a heartbeat. Mr. Hayes continued reading through the will, confirming details about the house deed, the business ownership transfer, and a small scholarship fund my father had left in my name to support young women in architecture. That one stopped me cold. I didn't even know he remembered that I'd once wanted to be an architect like him. After he wrapped up, he handed me a keyring. "He wanted you to have these today," he said. There were 2 keys on the ring. One to the front door of the house I hadn't lived in since I was 20, and one to the private studio he used to work in behind it. I stared at the keys for a long second before gently curling my fingers around them. Loretta was gone by the time I stepped outside. Her car was no longer in the parking lot. No apology, no parting words, just silence, finally working in my favor. I walked to my car with Jade beside me. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees, casting everything in gold. "You okay?" she asked. I took a breath. "I think I am." "You handled that like a pro," she said. "I handled it like a daughter who waited too long to be heard." We drove to the house, my house now. I hadn't been there in years, not since I stormed out after Loretta said I'd never be enough for my father, but this time the keys slid into the lock like they belonged. The door opened easily. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Everything was just how I remembered it. My childhood drawings still hung on the fridge. The living room still had the leather chair he always claimed after dinner. The studio light in the backyard was still flickering through the blinds. I stood in the doorway, letting it all rush over me. My father didn't leave me money to hurt her. He left me this, his world, his space, his final truth, because in the end, he remembered me. And finally, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. It's been 3 months since my father passed. The house is quiet now, peaceful in a way it never was when Loretta lived here. I wake up to birds outside the kitchen window, not the sound of her heels tapping across the tile or her voice criticizing how I brewed coffee too weak. I drink it the way I like it now, light, with oat milk and just the right amount of cinnamon. The first week after the will reading, I stayed busy, Cleaning, unpacking, repainting the studio, I found boxes of my childhood art stored away in the attic, carefully labeled in my father's handwriting. He had kept every drawing I ever gave him, even the messy ones from kindergarten, especially those. One night, while sorting through his old blueprints, I found a file marked KB Future Inside were drafts of a small art gallery. He'd started designing it after I left for college. I didn't know. He never told me. But he believed in me, even after everything, even when he didn't know how to show it out loud. I cried for the first time in weeks that night, not the kind of cry that leaves you hollow, the kind that washes something away, the kind that makes room. Jade visits often. She brings takeout and always sits in the same chair by the window, like she's claiming her corner of this new life with me. Sometimes we talk about Loretta, mostly in passing. I heard she tried to challenge the will but didn't get far. My dad's preparations were airtight. She eventually stopped trying. I think she finally realized the man she thought she controlled had made his final decision without her. I don't hate her, not anymore. Hatred is heavy. I carried it for so long I forgot what it felt like to breathe without it pressing on my ribs. But somewhere between the silence of this house and the truth my father left behind, let it go. I still feel him here, not in a ghostly way. More like muscle memory, like when I'm in the studio and I instinctively reach for the pencil he used to keep in the second drawer. Or when I walk past the coat rack and expect his navy jacket to be hanging there. I talk to him sometimes, quietly, not because I think he can hear me, but because some words deserve to be said, even if no one's there to answer. Thank you, I say most often, not just for the house or the keys, for seeing me. I used to wonder if staying silent that day at the hospital made me weak, if I should have stood up to Loretta, if I should have fought back louder, harder. But now I know silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's strength. Sometimes silence says, I'm not going to waste my breath proving myself to someone who's already decided I'm not enough. Because I was enough. I am enough. And my father knew that in the end. That's what matters. People still reach out occasionally. Old family friends, distant cousins. They say things like, I had no idea things were like that, or your dad always lit up when he talked about you. I smile, thank them, and leave it at that. They don't need the whole story. The ones who matter already know it. One morning, I walked out to the backyard and unlocked the studio door. The light filtered in through the skylight, warm and golden. I hung my father's favorite drafting ruler on the wall above the desk. Then I pinned up my first new sketch in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I finally had space to create again. In the quiet of that studio, I realized something. You can spend your whole life trying to prove your worth to the wrong people, or you can wait until the right person sees you fully and leaves behind a legacy that whispers, you were never the disappointment. You were the hope, the heartbeat, the one who stayed soft in a world that tried to harden you. This house doesn't feel like an inheritance. It feels like forgiveness, a second chance, a final chapter that turns into a beginning. And I plan to fill every room with light, laughter, and the kind of love that never makes someone feel like they don't belong. Because I know what it's like to be forgotten, and I know the power of finally being remembered. If this story hit you in any way, if you've ever felt silenced, overlooked, or made to believe you weren't enough, I want you to know something. You are not alone, and you are not a disappointment. Your worth isn't measured by who tries to tear you down, but by how you rise, how you heal, and how you carry your truth, even when it's quiet. If this story moved you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. Leave a comment below. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your thoughts or your own experience. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and honest, subscribe to the channel. There's so much more I want to share with you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the loudest kind of strength is the kind that waits. Until next time. When my son stepped outside and saw the empty backyard, he looked up at me with his wide, hopeful eyes and asked, "Did nobody want to come, Mom?" I forced a smile so he wouldn't see the ache in my chest. I told him maybe they were just running late. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe anything but the truth. He turned back toward the space-themed decorations we'd put up together the night before. The balloons we tied to the fence swayed gently in the breeze, untouched. The cake sat perfectly centered on the folding table, with his name written across the top in blue frosting. Eli, age 8. Every chair was empty. Then I heard the voice behind me. My neighbor, Mrs. Radley, leaned over the fence and said loud enough for Eli to hear, "No one wants to celebrate with a broken family." I didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, but because if I opened my mouth, I might fall apart. Eli stood still, his small hands clenched at his sides. I could tell he was trying not to cry. I wanted to fix everything in that moment, to give him joy, to make him feel seen, but I felt powerless. Then, out of nowhere, a black van rolled up to the curb. Slowly, quietly. The engine cut off. Doors opened. 3 men stepped out, dressed in full Air Force uniforms, one of them carrying a cake. The entire street fell silent. My name is Lena Monroe, and for the last year, it's just been me and my son, Eli. I didn't expect to be raising him alone. I didn't plan on becoming a single mother before I turned 35, but life rarely asks for permission before it breaks you. Eli's father left last spring. There was no big fight, no dramatic ending. He just stopped trying. One day, he came home from work, said he needed space, and packed a duffel bag. He moved into an apartment across town and gradually faded out of our lives. At first, I held it together for Eli. I kept his bedtime routine the same, made sure his lunches were packed, showed up to parent-teacher conferences with a brave face. But deep down, I was unraveling. Eli never asked why his dad wasn't around anymore. He just got quieter, started sleeping with the light on, stopped asking to invite friends over. I tried to overcompensate. I'd buy him extra sprinkles for his pancakes. I'd sit through the same dinosaur documentary 20 times just to hear him laugh. On Saturdays, we'd build forts in the living room and pretend we were explorers on alien planets. Eli has always been imaginative. He believes in kindness, in good guys and heroes. He's the kind of kid who says thank you to the mailman and hugs stray dogs. So when he told me 3 months ago that he wanted a real birthday party this year, with games and decorations and cake and friends, I told him absolutely yes. No hesitation. I picked up extra shifts at the diner. I stopped buying coffee and did my nails at home. Every extra dollar went into a little white envelope I kept hidden in the kitchen drawer, labeled Eli's Big Day. He picked the theme himself, Space Explorer Training Camp. We made cardboard rockets together. He wanted to dress up like an astronaut, and I found him the perfect helmet at a thrift store downtown. We hand-wrote the invitations. I helped him pass them out at school. He was so proud. He told me every morning how many days were left. 8 more days, Mom. 4 more days, Mom. Tomorrow's the launch. He asked me if I thought his friends would like the moonwalk I rented. I said of course they would, but in the back of my mind there was a quiet fear, a fear I didn't want to say out loud. Ever since the divorce, things had changed. The parents I used to chat with at school pickup barely looked at me anymore. Some pulled their kids from playdates without explanation. Others just said things like, "We're really busy lately." I tried not to take it personally. I told myself people were just dealing with their own lives, but I knew what was really going on. In a town like ours, a single mom might as well be carrying a scarlet letter, especially one whose ex-husband used to coach Little League and lead prayer circles. People chose sides even when I didn't ask them to. Still, I didn't want Eli to feel that. I didn't want him to carry the weight of my broken marriage. The night before his party, we stayed up late blowing up balloons and taping silver stars to the fence. He told me it was going to be the best day of his life. I told him I couldn't wait to see it. I remember the way he looked at everything when we were done. He stood in the middle of the yard, arms crossed like a captain surveying his ship. "You think people will like it?" he asked. "They're going to love it," I said. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying the invitations in my head, the smiles I thought I saw from the other kids. I wanted to believe the best. The morning of the party, I made Eli's favorite breakfast, banana pancakes with chocolate chips. He wore his astronaut costume all day, kept asking what time it was, how many more minutes until people showed up. At 2 o'clock sharp, we opened the gate. Music started playing. The cake was ready. His party table had goodie bags, plastic telescopes, and glow-in-the-dark stickers. And we waited. Every passing minute felt like a paper cut, small but sharp. A reminder. He kept looking at the street. Every time a car passed, he ran to the gate, then came back slower than he left. An hour later, he asked if maybe they just got lost. I told him maybe. Maybe. But deep down, I knew. And when that woman next door said what she did, when she reminded me exactly how people saw us now, I felt something in me start to crack. Eli was still staring at the empty chairs when I whispered, "We'll make this day special anyway." I meant it, but I didn't know how. Not yet. By 3 o'clock, I knew. No one was coming. I kept checking my phone, even though there were no notifications, no texts saying, "running late," or "we're on our way." Just silence. Eli sat at the party table with his little astronaut gloves still on, trying to open a juice box. I watched him struggle for a second before I stepped in to help. He smiled at me and said, "Maybe they're parking far away and walking." I nodded and said, "Yeah, that could be it." But my heart was breaking. The music I'd spent an hour picking out started to feel loud and awkward, so I turned it down. The balloons we tied up that morning had started to droop in the sun. One of them popped, and Eli jumped. He laughed nervously and looked around to see if anyone else thought it was funny. No one did. He looked at me and whispered, "I think we should wait inside. They'll probably come when it's cooler." I helped him gather the unopened goodie bags. I saw how he avoided looking at the empty chairs. I wanted to take all the pain away, but I didn't know how. Not this kind of pain. We stepped into the kitchen, and I told him to start on his scavenger hunt while I finished getting the cake ready. Really, I just needed a minute to cry. I turned away from him, opened the fridge, and bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. I couldn't let him see me like that. Just then, he asked from the living room, "Mom, are broken families bad?" I froze. My hands were still gripping the edge of the counter. I turned around slowly and said, "What do you mean, honey?" He looked at me with eyes too serious for an 8-year-old. "Mrs. Radley said nobody wants to come to our house because we're a broken family." There it was, the sentence that shattered me. I dropped to my knees in front of him and took off his helmet. "No," I said firmly. "We are not broken. We are strong. Just because it's you and me doesn't mean we're less than anyone else." He nodded like he believed me, but his eyes were still full of questions. That woman had always made little comments, subtle digs about Eli playing alone or about how I was doing my best like it was a charity case, but this was the first time she'd let her bitterness spill over in front of my son. I walked to the window and peeked through the curtain. She was in her garden, pruning her roses like she hadn't just kicked my son's heart in the teeth. I opened the back door and stood on the porch. She didn't even turn to look. "Nice turnout," she said without glancing up. "Guess people aren't interested in awkward situations." I wanted to scream at her, to march into her yard and tell her exactly what I thought of her cruel little remarks. But I didn't, because Eli was standing behind me, watching, and I didn't want him to see me become someone ugly. I took a breath and said, "You didn't have to say that in front of my son." She finally looked at me. "Kids should know the truth early. Life isn't some fantasy." I shut the door quietly and turned back to Eli. His helmet was back on. He'd started the scavenger hunt on his own. He was crouched behind the couch with a toy telescope, pretending to scan for alien life. I watched him for a second. He was trying so hard to be okay. I couldn't let this be how he remembered his 8th birthday. I wouldn't. I grabbed the Bluetooth speaker and cranked up the music again. I walked outside and shouted into the yard, "Commander Eli, mission control is online. Prepare for launch." He poked his head around the corner. "Really?" "Absolutely. We've got a mission to complete. Alien life forms have taken over Sector 4. His face lit up. He ran outside and pointed dramatically at the tree near the fence. "They're hiding behind that asteroid." And just like that, we were back in the game. We ran. We dodged invisible laser beams. We laughed louder than I'd heard him laugh in weeks. He was sweating under his costume, but he didn't care. I didn't either. At one point, I caught my breath and looked around. No guests, no RSVP texts, just me and my son. But there was joy in his voice again. That was something. Then, just as we were planning our final assault on the alien mothership, aka the shed, we heard it. Tires. Gravel crunching. I turned toward the street. A black van was pulling up to the curb. At first, I thought it was a delivery van. Maybe someone sent Eli a surprise gift. Maybe my mom had ordered something last minute, maybe anything that would give this day some kind of magic, but this van was different. Matte black, no logos. The kind of vehicle you'd expect in a movie, not on our quiet little street lined with minivans and wind chimes. It came to a slow stop right in front of our house. The engine went silent. I instinctively stepped in front of Eli. The side door slid open. 3 men stepped out one by one. They were dressed in full Air Force uniforms, clean, pressed, boots polished. One of them, tall, maybe early 40s, was carrying a cake box in his gloved hands. Another held a large wrapped present. The third wore a pair of aviators and looked like he'd walked straight out of a recruitment poster. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I glanced at Eli. He was frozen in place, his little hand still clutching the plastic telescope. The man with the cake approached first. He stopped just inside the yard and looked at me kindly. "Ma'am," he said, "we're looking for a Commander Eli Monroe." Eli blinked. "That's me." The man's face broke into a smile. "Sir, we were informed today was your launch celebration. We've come to report for duty and bring supplies from the base." I stared at him, stunned. I don't understand. How did you—" He held up his phone and turned the screen to show me. It was my social media post from earlier, the photo of Eli sitting alone in his birthday chair under the space banner we made together. The caption read, "I just wanted one happy day for my boy." I'd written it in a moment of desperation, hoping someone out there might hear me. I never imagined anyone actually would. "We were off duty, just wrapping up a community training," the man continued. "Saw the post. We figured we could do something about it." I didn't know whether to cry or hug them. Eli looked up at me with eyes wide in disbelief. "Are they real?" he whispered. I nodded slowly. "They're real, baby." The airmen went back to the van and started unloading. Not just one present, but multiple. A telescope, a model rocket kit, a signed photo from a real astronaut. One of them pulled out a folding table, another set up chairs, and the man with the cake gently placed it on the center of our original party table, right where ours had started to melt in the sun. The cake was navy blue with tiny edible stars and planets. In the center, in white icing, it read, "Commander Eli, mission accomplished." Eli stood perfectly still, like he couldn't believe it was real. Then one of the airmen knelt down and held out a badge. "This is for you, Commander. Space Exploration Honorary Unit. Welcome aboard." Eli took it with both hands and stared at it like it was made of gold. Then, with all the pride in the world, he saluted. The men straightened and saluted back. It was quiet, respectful, powerful. I heard a door creak open across the street. Mrs. Radley had stepped out onto her porch, pruning shears still in hand. She squinted at the uniforms, then backed into her house without a word. A few other neighbors peeked through blinds. No one said anything. The whole street felt like it had been hit with a wave of silence and awe. Then Eli turned to me and asked, "Can I invite them to play the scavenger hunt?" I laughed, actually laughed for the first time all day. I think they'd be honored. The rest of the afternoon, we had a real party. Not the one I planned, but something even better. They helped Eli search for alien artifacts in the yard. One of them let him try on a real Air Force cap. Another taught him how to stand at attention. He soaked up every second of it. And I stood there watching, trying to memorize the way his face looked. Joyful, validated, seen. Not left behind, not forgotten. This wasn't a rescue mission, it was a reminder that sometimes, when the people closest to you disappoint you the most, the kindness of strangers can feel like a miracle. I didn't know who had shared my post or how far it traveled. Somehow, it found the right hearts. And those hearts showed up, in a black van, with a cake, and a sense of honor that filled the emptiest day with something unforgettable. The sun had dipped lower in the sky by the time the cake was cut. Eli stood at the head of the table, still wearing his space helmet, surrounded by men in uniform who clapped and cheered as I lit the candles. I watched his face glow with the flickering light, his eyes wide, cheeks flushed from running and laughing. I held the lighter a second longer than I needed to, trying to burn the image into my memory. "All right, Commander," said the man who had brought the cake. "Make a wish and prepare for launch." Eli closed his eyes tightly. I saw his little fists clench at his sides like the wish had to pass through every part of his body before he blew. Then, one big puff. Cheers erupted. They all clapped again, someone whistled, and one of the airmen gave Eli a high five so hard he nearly toppled over. As I sliced the cake, one of the men leaned in and said quietly, "He's a good kid. You're doing something right." That nearly undid me. I nodded, smiling too hard, blinking too fast, trying not to fall apart right there with a plastic knife in my hand. We passed slices of cake around. I grabbed a juice box from the cooler, handed it to Eli, and sat beside him on the grass. He leaned against me and whispered, "Mom, are they superheroes?" I smiled. "They're real-life ones." He paused. "I don't think I want to be a space explorer anymore." I looked down at him, caught off guard. "No?" He shook his head and pointed at one of the airmen showing off how to fold a paper plane into a fighter jet. "I want to do what they do. I want to help people who feel sad like me." I couldn't speak, because in that moment I realized something had changed in him. Eli wasn't just happy that people showed up. He felt powerful. He felt worthy. He felt seen in a way he hadn't in months. That quiet, invisible ache he'd been carrying since his father left. It didn't disappear, but something inside it shifted. Something lifted. That mattered more than any present or party I could have planned. Later, after cake and games, the airmen gathered in front of the shed, Eli's alien mothership, and asked if they could hold a special ceremony. I said of course. They had him stand tall in front of the shed, helmet tucked under his arm like a real cadet. Then the man with the badge read from a small card. "Commander Eli Monroe," he said loud and proud, "for bravery in the face of isolation, for maintaining high morale during mission failure, and for demonstrating resilience far beyond your rank, we hereby induct you into the United States Space and Air Honorary Youth Corps." He clipped a second badge to Eli's chest and saluted. Eli stood straighter than I'd ever seen him stand. His bottom lip trembled, but he held it together. "I accept the mission," he said. Everyone clapped. It wasn't just sweet, it was sacred. That moment, more than any, was the one I'll carry forever. After they packed up, the airmen shook my hand one by one. Each of them said something kind. "You're a hell of a mom. You've got one special kid. You made today unforgettable." I didn't try to pretend I wasn't crying by then. I just thanked them again and again. Because how else do you respond to something like that? The last man to leave turned back before he got in the van. "Hey," he called to Eli, "next time you plan a mission, let us know. We'll bring the whole crew." Eli saluted. "Yes, sir." And just like that, they were gone. No one else on the block said a word. The Radleys didn't come back out. The other neighbors watched from behind curtains and blinds. But they saw it. They couldn't pretend they hadn't. Eli and I stood in the middle of the yard, now littered with cake crumbs, crumpled napkins, and stomped balloons. It looked like a war zone and felt like a dream. Eli looked up at me and said, "Mom?" "Yeah, baby. Do you think they really liked me?" I bent down, touched his badge, and said, "They didn't just like you, Eli. They respected you." And for the first time in a long time, I saw him believe it. That night, after the last crumbs of cake had been swept up and the final balloon had given in to gravity, I stood at the kitchen sink watching Eli through the window. He was outside in his pajamas, crouched under the stars with his new telescope. He hadn't taken off his honorary badge all evening. It clung slightly crooked to his shirt, glinting in the moonlight like a medal he'd earned in battle. I let the dishwater run too long. I wasn't really washing. I was replaying every moment of the day, every heartbreak, every surprise, every smile that felt like a miracle. This wasn't the party I planned. It wasn't the birthday I imagined for him. But in a way, it turned out to be exactly what he needed, and maybe what I needed too. A little after 9, I called him in. He ran inside with his cheeks flushed, his eyes glowing, and the telescope cradled like a baby. "Can I keep it by my bed tonight?" he asked. "Of course," I said. We went through his nighttime routine, brushed teeth, washed face, changed into clean pajamas. But when I pulled the covers back and tucked him in, I noticed something different. He didn't ask to keep the light on. He didn't say he was scared of being alone in the dark. He just reached for my hand and said, "Thank you for today." I sat on the edge of his bed and brushed his hair back. "You were so brave," I said. "I'm proud of you." "I think Dad would have been proud too," he said, Not sadly. Just honestly. Like it was a fact he had quietly come to accept. I didn't respond right away. I didn't want to ruin the moment by dragging my pain into his peace, so I just nodded. Yeah, I think he would have been. Eli closed his eyes and held the telescope badge to his chest like it was something sacred. A few minutes later, he was asleep. I sat there longer than I needed to, just watching him breathe. There's something about seeing your child find their light again after you've watched them dim for so long. It's not just relief. It's a kind of rebirth. When I finally left his room, I checked my phone. Dozens of notifications. My post had been shared hundreds of times. Comments from strangers across the country. Offers to send gifts, cards, even one woman who said she wanted to fly out to throw Eli a real party next year. I read each message, every kind word, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not alone. One comment stood out. A woman wrote, "I've been scared to leave my marriage because I didn't want my kids to grow up in a broken family, but after watching what you did for your son, I think I finally understand that being whole doesn't always mean being two parents under one roof." I sat down at the kitchen table and cried, not because I was sad, but because I finally believed something I'd been trying to tell myself for months. We weren't broken. We were healing. And healing doesn't always look like soft music and inspirational quotes. Sometimes it looks like a half-eaten cake, a backyard full of empty chairs, and a black van that pulls up when you least expect it. Sometimes it's a stranger who shows up because they saw your pain and decided to do something about it. The next morning, something strange happened. As I was taking the trash out, Mrs. Radley stepped outside. For the first time, she didn't look smug or judgmental. She looked unsure. She cleared her throat. "Quite a turnout yesterday," she said. I didn't respond. She looked down, fidgeting with the sleeve of her cardigan. I didn't know people still did things like that, showing up for strangers." I just looked at her. "Well, sometimes strangers are better than neighbors." She didn't say anything, just nodded once and turned back inside. I didn't need her apology. I wasn't doing this for people like her anymore. This was for Eli, for the kind of boy who believed in stars even when the sky was cloudy, and for the mom who finally remembered how to believe with him. Thank you for listening to our story. If it moved you, if it reminded you that kindness still exists, even in the most unexpected places, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need a little hope today, and leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever experienced a moment where a stranger showed up when you least expected it? I read every message, and your stories mean more than you know. And if you want more real stories like this, about love, resilience, and finding light in the dark, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We're building a space here where broken doesn't mean defeated. Thanks for being part of it. We're not alone. Not really.